Hello everyone, my name is Charlene, and today I'm going to be going over the books that I read in the fall quarter, part 1. So I mentioned in my October wrap-up that on a monthly basis, I'm only going to be doing wrap-ups for readathons or read-alongs or things along that line. I'm not really going to be doing a full month reading wrap-up. Simply because, and I didn't really explain this, but basically it's because with the way my filming schedule works, I have to record TBRs and wrap-ups in 2 different weeks. They have to be back-to-back weekends. I can usually only film on the weekends. And then it's a very tight window to get the video filmed, edited, and uploaded. So rather than do that to myself every single month, I'm just going to do it once a quarter. However, I also said if there were enough books that I needed to talk about, that I would break it up into 2 parts, and this one definitely needs to be 2 parts. I have 10 books to talk about today, and I don't even know for sure how many I need to talk about in part 2. I know it's more than in this video, but that's all I remember for sure. So we're just going to divide it into 2 parts, so that way the video is not forever long. Some of these books I did vlog my reading of them, so if you want to know more, I will let you know which ones are in vlogs, and you can check them out down in the description below if you want to hear more of my thoughts, especially more spoilery thoughts. But since there's already quite a few books to get into, let's go ahead and get started. So the first books that I'm going to talk about are the ones for my Sci-Fi Fantasy One and Done Challenge. And the one you guys picked for an author that I needed to read another book by was Elizabeth Lim, and Six Crimson Cranes was the book that had the most votes. So this book is a fairy tale retelling. For some reason, I understood that this was based on The Seven Swans, I think is what it's called. 6 Swans, 7 Swans, I don't remember which now, by Hans Christian Andersen. But apparently it's a retelling of The Wild Swans. So I haven't read that fairy tale, but I have read the Hans Christian Andersen one. And in this story, we follow Shiori, who is princess of a fantasy kingdom, and her stepmother ends up turning her 6 brothers into cranes and curses her with not being able to speak, or for every single word that she speaks, one of her brothers will die. So she is sent away from the land and has to try to figure out how to survive without being able to talk, and also try to figure out where her brothers are, how to break the spell, all of that. Overall, this was a really good book. I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the overall plot. I liked a lot of the characters. However, I don't know for sure if I will finish out this duology because there are only 2 books in it. Actually, I guess there's 3 if you count the prequel. But there is one character in this book that kind of at the beginning of the book, I was almost like, why is this character even here? I didn't mind the character. I just didn't understand his purpose in the story. And then by the time we get to the end of the book, I understand his purpose in the story, but I don't like it. There were just certain things that he was doing, ways that he was acting towards Shiori in the latter part of the story that just really made me start to feel like, I'm not sure I'm supposed to trust this guy. And then, to not give away spoilers, there's reactions that he has towards another character that just really rubbed me the wrong way. Because I don't understand why this character cares. So, that character that I don't care for is going to play, by the sounds of it, a more prominent role in the second book. And because I don't care for the character, I'm not sure I want to read the second book. But, overall, I really enjoyed this story. And then the series that you guys voted for me to continue was The Giver Quartet. And I'd only read the first book, so I next needed to read Gathering Blue. And this is by Lois Lowry. The entire series, from what I can tell, takes place in the future of our world, basically after an apocalypse. In the first 2 books, we see 2 different societies that have emerged out of the ashes of this apocalypse. In this story, we follow Kira, who was born with a bad foot. Or bad leg. I don't remember which it is, but her foot is twisted inwards. So she can't walk properly. And her father died before she was born, so she was raised by her mother. And this is a society that has no use for the invalid. So honestly, they wanted to just leave her in this field, where apparently if you leave people in the field, like beasts will come and get them and they die. They wanted to just leave her in the field after she was born because her leg was deformed. But her mother fought for her, wanted to raise her, wanted to keep her, so they ended up allowing it. Well, at the beginning of this book, her mother has died. And so now the people in the village are like, this is our chance to get rid of her. So she's taken to trial to try to convince the council that she's not of use to them, that she's more of a burden than a help, and they should just get rid of her. They should just leave her in the field. But the council ends up deciding to allow her to stay, except she's going to live in the council building, and she is considered a weaver. So she is stitching a special robe that is used at a ceremony that happens once a year. There are a lot of things in this book where you can see this is not an ideal society whatsoever. People are not kind to each other. They're not kind to their families. This is really not the kind of society that you really want to live in. But the story itself was really good. I ended up loving this story. I love Kira's character. Like The Giver, this ends on a more ambiguous note. So we're left not really knowing how things are going to go after this story ends. We know where the characters would like it to go, but we don't know where it's actually going to go. And honestly, I loved my entire time reading this book. There were some things that happened that I realized they were going to happen not long before they did. There were other things that I was surprised by. So overall, it was a really good story. And I can say that I enjoyed it enough that I continued on from there. I also read Messenger. My hope, as short as these books are, was actually to read the entire rest of the series in the fall. However, I ended up running out of time to get to Sun, so I have not finished the series, but I did read Messenger as well, and I really enjoyed this one also. I'm not going to go into what this one is about because it would be spoilery for the first book and definitely the second book, but it is set in a village that we haven't seen before, but we are following some characters that we have met in both the first and second book. So we do at this point get more of a continuation of their stories. We find out what happened to some of these characters. Again, another one I really enjoyed. The first 3 books in the series are really quick, easy reads. They're not too terribly long. I don't remember how long Messenger is. But Gathering Blue is 241 pages. So they're very short books. However, according to Goodreads, Sun is just under 400 pages. So almost twice the length of Gathering Blue. And I think Messenger is actually under 200 pages. So it is twice the length of Messenger. So I can't speak for Sun, but I really enjoyed Gathering Blue, really enjoyed Messenger. I will say the end of Messenger I did not see coming, but it is a really interesting story. Honestly, there are things that happen in the society that almost makes me go, are we sure this takes place on Earth? Because there's elements that just feel a little more magical or supernatural, like people have abilities that people do not have at this point in time. So I don't know why people have these abilities. And they're not necessarily big things, but it's just things about them that are clearly different from the average person. So I'm not sure what to make of that part of it. But the rest of it, I've really enjoyed my time with this. And if I had had the time, I would have read Sun in the fall and just finished out the series. But unfortunately, I kind of ran out of time with all of the other books I was wanting to get to. Alright, so the rest of this video is going to be just the books that I read in September. Because that's how many books I've read this fall, that I can only cover 1 month in part 1. Technically, Six Crimson Cranes and... Gathering Blue I finished in October, Six Crimson Cranes and Messenger I finished in November. So they are from other months, but I wanted to talk about them first and talk about them all together. So if you were curious about my thoughts on that particular challenge, you could get these all at once and not just have to wait for part 2 for them to come up. So moving on to the books from September. The first one that I finished was The Secret Book and Scone Society by Ellery Adams, which is the first in a series of the same title. This one I picked up because it was the Comfy Cozy Book Club's pick in July. I did not get to it in July. Didn't get to it in August. Finally got to it in September. But this is a mystery, and it's set... I don't remember what town it's set in. It's set in Miracle Springs, but I don't know if we're ever told where Miracle Springs is. But we have a woman who owns a bookshop, and she's apparently very good at giving people the books they need when they need them. And she has a friend who owns a bakery, and she's very good at creating scones that bring back certain memories for people. Like, it's kind of like the main character with her bookstore. It's exactly what they need when they need it. So the main character ends up meeting this man, and he's troubled about something. And she tells him, go to this bakery, go get a scone, and then come to my bookstore and I'll give you a book. Well, he makes it to the bakery, but before he can make it to the bookstore, he ends up falling in front of a train. And initially, I think it's by the sheriff, it's ruled as an accident. Either an accident or a suicide. But the main character is sure by how this guy was acting that this was not a suicide. That more than likely he was pushed. And so the rest of the story is her and these other women in town trying to figure out who killed this man and why. Overall, it's a really good story. I will be honest, I didn't love it the way a lot of people do. There are things about it I did enjoy. I like kind of the small town vibe. The women who all live in the same town, but a lot of them have never really talked. They don't know each other that well, but slowly becoming friends. You know, solving this small town mystery. I enjoyed all of that. I don't know what specifically it was, but it was, for the most part, reading through the book, it was enjoyable. I enjoyed my time while I was reading it, but I don't know. Maybe it was just missing something. I didn't love it, and I can't really explain why, because I'm not entirely sure what it was missing. I know there were a couple aspects in the book where I felt like something got missed in editing because there were continuity issues or something like that, but I don't think that was the entire reason. I think there was just something about this that just didn't work as well for me as it has for other people. I did enjoy it enough that I do think I want to continue the series, and maybe I'll enjoy one of the other books more. I don't know. Maybe I just went in with my expectations too high and it just didn't quite meet them. I'm not sure. But it is a really good book, and if you like cozy mysteries, I would recommend checking it out. Alright, then the next book that I finished was The Fifth Avenue Story Society by Rachel Hawk, which, yeah, I realized at the time that I finished them that I have 2 society books that I finished around the same time. And they do both involve a group of people getting together and slowly becoming friends. But, you know. This one's in a very different vein, though. This is a contemporary book. And I should specify, this one is contemporary Christian. And in this book, we follow 5 characters who all seemingly randomly get invited to this Fifth Avenue Story Society that takes place at the Fifth Avenue Library in in New York. All of them come there not knowing why they were invited, not knowing what's expected of them, and when they arrive, there's no host. There's nobody in the room. They're escorted to a room, but there's nobody there to lead it, to tell them why they're there. But in the end, they ultimately decide to keep getting together once a week and try to figure out what this society is about or what they want to make it about. And as it progresses through the story, we learn more and more about these characters and discover that all of them have things from their past that cause them pain, that they really haven't moved on from. So this is a really good story of friendship, of dealing with the pains of your past, of learning how to deal with it, let go, move on. Overall, it was a really good book. I think the only reason that this wasn't necessarily a perfect book for me is honestly because of the epilogue. The epilogue just took the story and then wrapped it up really nice and neat. We know exactly how everybody's story ends up. We know everybody lives happily ever after. They ended up with the person they wanted to be with. They got the job they wanted, whatever the case may be. And part of me just feels like I think probably something could have been tweaked a little bit in the last chapter to make it wrap up a little bit better. But other than that, if it had ended at the last chapter and there had been no epilogue, I think this would have been spot on perfect for me, which is impressive with a contemporary because I don't have a good track record when it comes to contemporary books. A lot of times I'll finish them and it's like, it was good, I'll give it 4 stars, but I don't love it. This one I really enjoyed. And just like I can't say I'm not sure what didn't work in Secret Book and Scone Society, I can't tell you what specifically worked in this book. But it did. Also, for those who are looking for faith content in their books, this story does start out with little to no faith content, but it grows as the story progresses. And I really like the way that things were discussed in this book. Just overall really well done. If you like contemporary books, if you like stories of friendship, highly recommend this book. Then the next book that I finished is The Red Queen by Philippa Gregory, which was the last book I needed to read for the Plantagenet and Tudor Court series. I do discuss this one in one of my September reading vlogs, and I also did a full review of the entire Plantagenet and Tudor Court series, so I will have links to both of those videos down in the description if you want more information on this book or the series as a whole. But this book follows Margaret Beaufort, who is the mother of the man who would become Henry VII of England. The story takes place during the War of the Roses, which was a fight between the Lancasters and the Yorks, who are cousins as far as family trees are considered. Basically, the two sides were fighting for who should be on the throne. So this follows from prior to Margaret Beaufort getting married and having her son, all the way until her son is an adult. And I'm not going to say any more than that because I don't really want to spoil it in case you're not familiar with the history, but yeah, we'll just say until he comes back to England, because he does leave England at one point. I will say, me personally, I really enjoyed this story. I will also warn, Margaret Beaufort is not a likable character. She is very proud, very self-centered. She talks about being religious, but it's basically whatever I want. It must be God telling me that I should have that. Is really kind of how it plays out. The parts in the story where we're hearing about what's going on in the country, I really enjoyed those parts. I can't say I enjoyed reading about Margaret Beaufort's life from her perspective because, again, she's a very vain person. But it was interesting reading the book and seeing how this woman that we know we don't like in The White Princess, kind of where she started. And I will be honest, what you see in The White Princess, that's what she's basically been her entire life, according to the Red Queen. Really interesting story, and definitely helped fill in the last of the gaps in this series as far as my knowledge of this time period. Now I definitely have to put down the coffee. Alright, the next book that I finished, finally, because it took me way too long to finish this book. Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, it's a chunky book, but I started it in May, and I didn't finish it until September. I also talk a bit about this one in one of my September vlogs. Should be the same one as The Red Queen. Like I said, I had started it in May. So anything I read prior to September is not going to be in that vlog. Overall, really enjoyed this book. I know a lot of people have talked about that this is their favorite in the Stormlight Archives series. I don't know for sure if I can say I like this one more than Way of Kings, to be perfectly honest. There are things I liked about this book more than Way of Kings. I liked a lot of the things that we learned about the characters, getting more of their backstory, getting to understand them better, especially Shalyn. I think I'm saying her name right, because how I say it in my head and how I say it in the audiobook are not the same, so I hope I'm saying that right. As far as the overall story, I'm not sure if I actually enjoyed this one more or Way of Kings more, and I'm leaning towards Way of Kings. I did really enjoy both, but there are some things with Way of Kings that I think I actually might have enjoyed that one more. I'd like to give a summary on this book or even this series, but this is an epic high fantasy series. We're predominantly following about 4 different characters. We're following Kaladin, Dalinar, and his son Adolin, and Shallan. Shallan. It is Shallan, isn't it? Shallan. I can't remember how they say it in the audiobook now. I'm just going to go with Shallan, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Those are the main characters that we're following, but we do get some other perspectives throughout the series. And it's set in a fictional world called Roshar, primarily in the Shattered Plains, which is where a battle is happening between basically the humans and the Parshendi, which are a human-like creature that has marbled black and red skin, and they are responsible for the death of the Alethi king. His death sparked this war that has been going on for several years. I can't remember the number now. I am tired today, so I apologize that I'm not remembering a lot of details. The war's been going on for several years because of this, and that's the main part that we're following in this story. Dalinar and his son Adolin are soldiers. Kaladin was a soldier, then became a slave, but where he's working still has to do with the army. And then we have Shallan, isn't it? Then we have Shallan, who, she's actually somewhere else in the world, but she is traveling to try to become an apprentice to the princess of Alethi and learn from her and also try to get something from her. That's as simple as I can explain it, because there is a lot going on in this series. I've really enjoyed it so far. Looking forward to getting to Oathbringer sometime next year. I don't know when for sure, but I will try to get to it next year. Alright, and clearly I need to wrap this up soon because 1, it's starting to get darker outside, so I'm losing my light, and 2, my battery died. So the next one that I read was The Taming of the Shrew, which is one of Shakespeare's comedies. And yes, I had seen 10 Things I Hate About You, but no, I had not read the play. But in this play, we have Catherine, or Katerina, and her sister Bianca. Catherine is the titular shrew. She has something to say to everybody. She is not nice to most people. Bianca has 2 suitors, 2 men who are interested in her. But her father says she can't marry until her sister does. He wants to make sure Catherine gets married off. Then we have a new guy come in town, and he hears about Catherine, and he's like, oh, I'm interested in this one. So he decides to pursue her. And we also end up with another new character in town who's interested in Bianca. So we have 3 men vying for Bianca's hand, and 1 trying to, I'm not sure win over is the right phrase, so much as just convince her that, yes, you should marry me. I did enjoy it, except for mostly the way it's written. It just really feels like the way that, I think it's Petruchio, who is trying to marry Catherine. It feels like the way that he tries to go about making her a better person kind of goes too far. I don't want to go into specifics because I don't want to go into spoilers on this one. If you want spoilery details, this one I cover in, I think it's my 2nd September blog. So I will have that link down below. You can listen to the spoilers there, but I'm not going to go into spoilers here. So that was my main issue with the play, is it just felt like he went a little bit too far. Then the next one that I read was The Aeneid by Virgil, and this is an epic poem that takes place following the Trojan War, as Aeneas and a lot of the other Trojans leave Troy and are attempting to sail to the area that will eventually become Rome. There's a lot that happens in this poem. Juno is not a fan of the Trojans, so she does whatever she can to try to thwart their plans, to throw them off course. We get insight into what's going on between the gods and goddesses, who's helping them, who's hindering them, all of that, and then everything that they go through, just trying to get to this place that they are supposed to settle. It is a really interesting story, though I will warn you, it just ends. It's like we hit the climax and story's over. Other than that, I did really enjoy it. I'd only read parts of this in college, so I didn't know the whole story. There were some parts that I liked more than others, and this is one I would like to revisit now that I know the story. I'd like to read it again at some point and just possibly get a little bit more out of it now that I'm not just trying to figure out what's happening and where are we going. Alright, then the last book I'm going to talk about, I actually finished on the 1st of October, but I'm talking about it here because I talked about it in my second September vlog. Also, the Aeneid was covered in there. I forgot to mention that. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it here with my September books. So that way, if you do watch my September vlog, you're not confused as to why Up From Dust is in the vlog and not in this wrap-up. This was the revised book club pick for September, which is why I was trying to finish it in September. Just didn't quite make it. And this is a biblical fiction book about the life of Martha from the New Testament. So this is Martha, who is sister of Mary and Lazarus. The book is divided into two parts. The first part follows Mary when she's younger, from about, I think, age 8 until probably about, I want to say like 15, 16, 17, maybe. I don't remember exactly how old she is at the end. Part 2 jumps ahead about 10 or 20 years. And in part 2 is when Jesus is traveling around healing people. He's teaching, all of that. And that's the point where Martha and her siblings meet Jesus. So the first part is kind of setting up what her life is like at the time that she meets Jesus, or by the time she meets Jesus. So we see a lot of loss. We see a lot of tension between different family members, between friends or former friends, a lot of those things. Overall, the book was good. I liked part 2 a whole lot more than part 1. And one of those things that kind of came to me more so after I had been done with the book for a while, not when I filmed the vlog, but I feel like if the majority of the book, or pretty much the entirety of the book, had been part 2, and we didn't have part 1, or we had very little of part 1, I think I would have enjoyed this more. There was just a lot in part 1 that, because we don't know much about Martha from the Bible, all of it is fictional. We don't know what her life was like. We don't know what her family was like when she was younger. None of that. And we really only have about 2, maybe 3 stories involving this family in the New Testament, which is the part that part 2 covers. There is a lot of the feeling of, yes, I have to take this with a grain of salt. I don't know. It was one of those books where part 1 especially, I felt like if we were following a fictional character, maybe a character who knew Mary and Martha, but wasn't actually one of them, I think I would have enjoyed it more. And I think the reason I enjoyed part 2 more is because that was actually a part that we do know something about them from the Bible. And yes, a lot of it is fictionalized, but we see the part of it that's rooted in Scripture as well. Whereas the things in part 1, none of it is rooted in Scripture because it's not covered in the Bible. The story was good. I just think I would have enjoyed it more if we were following a fictional character instead of Martha, or if it was predominantly part 2 and very little, if any, of part 1. That's the simplest way I can try to describe that. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in September, plus my 3, in the end, one and done books that I read. If you read any of the books that I talked about today, let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. And other than that, I hope you are having a wonderful Christmas season, and I'll see you later.